On June 10th, the head of Instagram said this about a specific metric. Blank matters most across the board.
What was it? Likes, comments, watch time, saves?
None of the above, in fact. And so today on the show, we're talking about the most important metric on Instagram, a metric that you're gonna have to really dig for if you even wanna find it.
Let's dive in.
Well, hey there, and welcome to the Pro Church Tools Show. We're here to help you and your church navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm Brady, your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. We call him Senor Sourdough. It's Alexander Mills.
Hello, hello.
And today, we are giving our first response and reactions to some of the, what I would label as pretty groundbreaking things that the head of Instagram, Adam Mosseri, discussed on a recent appearance of his on the Colin and Samir show. Before we get into that, a recent question we got on one of the mailbag editions, Bro Church Tools, folks were asking us, hey, are you going to do any YouTube videos where you're doing some more like personality content alongside the teaching? And as of yesterday, presuming it went according to plan, the debut episode of a brand new series called Pro Church Tools Inc. went live on my YouTube channel, Brady Shearer. And this has been something that we have wanted to do for a very long time. You know, we have been doing the YouTube channel for 10 years, and the company is 10 years old. And we're in this brand new decade, the first month of a new decade of our company. And instead of just doing the talking head, read from a teleprompter kind of videos, which frankly I've gotten a little bit disillusioned with because I've done 700 of them.
Yeah.
Not because there's a problem with them.
Sure.
Just I was like, hey, something fresh.
Yeah.
And we had contemplated, like we said, doing this before, and we just kind of hit a roadblock every single time. And this time felt like got the release from the Lord. Be like, no, I'm not going to say not yet this time. Like, go for it. And so the first episode went live as of yesterday. We'd love for you to go watch it. Love to get your feedback as we kind of learn the new rhythm and cadence of these kind of videos because they're different from everything that we've ever done. We want to continue what we've always done on the channel, helping churches navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. But we also want to pull back the curtain on what we've been doing for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Just building and running a company.
Yeah. And we have a great story to tell through this series. We're telling a very specific story and something that's unfolding, happening here in this office, in the Pro Church Tools office, in real time. This thing that we're trying to accomplish, this delusional kind of target, if you will. You have to tune into that show to see kind of what we're talking about. But we're telling a story in real time. It's happening in real time, and that's kind of that brings in like this element of, for me at least, like excitement, like that we're documenting this journey that we're on. And these are the types of videos we've talked about this, that we like to look back on in the future, our future selves, to look back on and to reminisce on those times. And so to be able to record and have this record of what we're trying to accomplish here at Pro Church Tools right now, it's going to be really special.
At Pro Church Tools Inc. All right, let's get into the big takeaways from the Adam Mosseri appearance on the Colin and Samir show. So, very beginning of the episode, Mosseri comes in hot and he says that sends per reach are one of the most important things to look at. In fact, he says, quote, in general, sends matter most across the board. Now, let's be clear. I thought this was called shares.
So did I. He used a few phrases throughout his interview that were like, oh, I've been calling this something different. And what I love about Adam is whenever he's interviewed, and he seems to do these interviews like pretty often, he seems to be a pretty like open book. He talks pretty explicitly about the algorithm and like phrases and nomenclature that the Instagram team, the Meta team uses behind closed doors. And he really lets you in. And he let us into something pretty embarrassing here, that they're called sends and not shares.
Yeah, so if you're curious where these exist or what they look like, this is the little paper airplane icon.
Yeah.
Sends. So this is when someone is enjoying a piece of content and feels so compelled by it that they want to, of course, share it.
Right.
In this case, send it to someone in the DMs. And what he goes on to say is that a huge part of what's going on in Instagram is folks enjoying content, or I guess also maybe really not enjoying content, and then sending it to friends and family. And this is why these types of interviews become so valuable for folks like us that are doing social ministry, because there's what you can visibly see on Instagram, and then there's what's happening behind the scenes that you cannot see. And what he says repeatedly is that what's going on behind the scenes that the public cannot see is actually dramatically more significant than what's happening visibly.
Yes.
And that's why sometimes the decisions that Instagram is making may seem misaligned from our perception of what Instagram is or should be. Because he's like, yeah, like this is what you guys say you want and this is what's happening. But like, if I told you what was happening behind the scenes and how much more activity is there, you'd maybe understand why we're doing what we're doing.
He said it so many times throughout this interview. He referenced this, the prioritization of sends, and then he followed it up by saying like Instagram, the best version of Instagram and the best types of posts on Instagram inspire conversation between friends. I don't know how many times he referenced that, but it seemed to be like the ethos of the platform, which is pieces of content, yes, that are entertaining, but the best pieces of content on the platform are being sent, being shared through the DMs a lot, but through text messages and what have you, to start or continue conversations between friends, between peers. And it's that content that Instagram is like really prioritizing in the explorative types of feeds in the platform. So whether it's you're actually on the Explore page or in the Reels tab, it's like they're showing you content that you are likely to have shared interest, to have an interest in at all, but also have shared interest with your peers on the app so that you can send it to them and start a conversation, which like you said, and you're talking about all of this activity that's happening on the app away from like the public eye, all happening in the DMs. And that's why shares and sends are, like you said, their most important metric that they're following.
Right. And I was curious, he's saying, rarely would you hear a platform come out and definitively say, this metric is the one that matters most. That's why we titled this podcast, Instagram's Most Important Metric Revealed, because it was a revelation when I was hearing him discuss this. Because what you would typically hear is a corporation being like, hey, you know what? We look at a lot of different signals and we are weighing a lot of different variables, and it's a complex tapestry of different weighted variables that determine whether or not your content reaches a broad
Thanks for
audience.
saying a lot of nothing.
But honestly, that like one, that's corporate speak that means nothing, but also like I can't imagine many algorithms are like, yeah, we care about one thing.
Yeah.
By the way, that one thing we care about, we don't even show it to you unless you really, really go looking for it. And so I was curious, like, why is this the most important metric? And what Messeri says is it drives the most value for the overall community. So they care about sends, and you know, the byproduct of that is that we should care about sends. Why? Because they interpret sends as that's the most valuable thing that this community as a whole can enjoy. You can open up your DMs and someone sent you something that you might like. You know, your wife is in my DMs a lot.
Of course.
And she's always sending me things that she thinks that I would like. And Adam Messeri, perhaps in disagreement with me, believes that this is valuable to the community.
But it does inspire conversation, which is how someone like you or me, I mean, your platform on Instagram is bigger than mine, so maybe you're not having too many conversations on Instagram, but like that's the strength.
I'm having a lot of conversations.
Yeah, it's like
on
the
Instagram.
strength of the platform to me. Whereas, and he says it in the interview, he references, well, Colin Samir asked him about TikTok, and he had very complimentary things to say about TikTok. And he says what TikTok does really well is like anytime you open the app, you know you're gonna have a good time. And so he's like, their strength is entertainment. But the way I use TikTok, if I'm sending something to someone from TikTok, I'm not doing it in the app. I'm taking it out of the app into a text message, which is not true in Instagram. If I'm sending something or sharing something from Instagram, it's very likely for me to happen in the platform itself.
So then let's reverse engineer this and apply it to the church context. If you know that sends are the most valuable metric to Instagram, that would mean that any type of content you can produce that results in a large amount of sends proportionately would be the type of content that reaches a wide audience. And if it's valuable to people on Instagram, what I love about this is that it also probably means it's valuable to people that are in your church. And this is really the tricky thing about effectiveness. I was listening to one of the podcasts that I frequent regularly, and one of the pastors on it was saying, he's like, our mission as churches is not to see more butts and seats. It's just to be faithful to what the Bible calls us to. And I was like, that's a profound statement. You know, it's nice to detach yourself from results. He's like, it's not about results. It's about faithfulness to the gospel. And then I was trying to like parse this out in my mind. And I was like, okay, what do I always say is the motivation behind what we do? The Great Commission, to go out to all the world and make disciples, which is like, is that not a results-based commission?
Right.
Like you would, if you were going to be faithful to that text, you would have to say, did I make a disciple or not? Which would be a result in some way. The reason I bring this up is because sometimes we can do things on social because we know that they work, but they could be misaligned with being faithful to the mission of the gospel.
Right.
For example, in an alternate universe, Messeri comes out and he says, you know what? The most important thing is likes. It's like, okay, we can do a lot of things to get likes on social that might be by nature kind of shallow, might be by nature not especially substantive, and we can be effective on social based on what social wants, but does that align with what we want to do as churches? I think this is the perfect intersection of both. And this is what's always ideal. We talk about this in fashion trends. You know, there are a million fashion trends every single year. Don't try to do them all if you care about this type of thing, because most of them won't actually work for your existing style, your body type, your personality.
Sure.
But every year there will be a small select number. And when you can identify those, you put them on. And one, you look on trends, so it's like, oh, wow, he's really putting that on. But also it's like, wow, he's really putting that on because it works for him. So in this case, if shares are the most valuable content, a share is driven by something, a piece of content that's so valuable and so useful and so compelling that you're like, I can't hold this in. I got to tell somebody else about it.
Yeah.
That aligns perfectly with what we would want our content to be inspiring in people that follow us, but also people that don't follow us, right?
Totally. And you know what's so unique about sends is, or I guess any insight that we look at when we create a really good piece of content that we like, that we believe in, that we believe is faithful to the gospel, and we post it. When we look at those insights to see how our community online responds to it, we all put our own weight and value on all those metrics. You know, there's likes, there's comments, there's sends, what I previously thought were shares, and saves.
Yeah.
And
actually, those are actually called secures. Yeah.
What Adam
Those are called
says,
file away for later.
yes, exactly. What Adam says in this interview is that when folks send a post, they are actually much less likely to like it.
Interesting.
It is interesting. And when he said that, and I kind of took stock of like my own behavior on social, I realized like, yeah, of course. Like if I see something on my feed that is really valuable to me, and I'm either gonna, if it's a meme, and I'm gonna send it to Brady, or if it's like, maybe a new baking technique and I'm going to send it to Brady,
Yes,
or
Lord.
if it's a parenting thing, I'm going to send it to my wife. I'm not going back to like the post. And so sometimes when we post stuff on social, on our church pages, we see all those likes and be like, yeah, this post was great. But that on the inverse is kind of an indication that like, well, maybe it was good enough for like a quick little, oh yeah, this made me feel good for 0.3 seconds. But it's the posts that get sent that are inspiring these conversations that are happening outside of our purview. We can't see where folks are sending or sharing our posts. We can't see who they're sending it to and what kind of conversations they inspire. But those insights into the sends, the shares of these posts is so much more valuable than just a like.
And this also matters because what is visible tends to be what is valued. And what is visible on social? The likes.
Yes.
It's the most visible thing. And so what that has done over the many years is it has trained us to believe that more likes must mean more success of a post.
Yep.
And this is where Instagram has some room to improve. If you're claiming that the most valuable metric is sends, why is it only accessible when I go back to a post, click view insights, and then I can see it?
Yep.
Where likes are, you can hover over a post on the grid and see all of them. Obviously, unless you choose to hide them, they are the only metric where you can like see the actual like number right there. It's first.
Yeah.
And so this requires us to retrain ourselves, because when something is the most visible, we then interpret it as the most valuable, but it's actually not. And so what can we do to prioritize content that does drive sends?
Yes.
And so one of the first things that you can do is identify the send percentage for the content that you make.
Yep.
You can do this for as much of the content as possible. The nice thing about insights on Instagram is that you can go back on your grid and just like go back as far as you want and generate insights. So you click on a post, click view insights, and then you'll be presented with the 4 different big metrics at the top. You're gonna see likes on the left, comments on the center left, sends on the center right, and then saves, or as I like to call them, I'm definitely going to return to this, but I never will ever again,
Yes.
on the far right. So then what you would do is take the number of sends on a post and divide it by the number of accounts that were reached total. So on this one example I'm looking at, This post had 83 sends and it reached 23,613 people for an overall percentage of 3.5%. The post after it had a lot bigger numbers. The post I published the next day had 2,289 overall sends, but it reached 52,383 accounts. So instead of 3.5% on the sends percentage, it had 4.4% on the sends percentage. So one, that second post did reach a lot more people overall, but what it also did was, despite having way more volume, proportionately, it still had a higher sends percentage. Yeah. So then I could look at those two posts, and one post versus one is not going to give you a ton of meaningful data. The sample size is going to be too small. But if you do this over the past 30, 60, 90 days, do it for 50 posts minimum. Yes. I know it's going to be a lot of work. If you feel stuck at all on social, if you do this practice, the insights that you will gain from it will be so valuable. What do we say? Repeat the best, forget the rest, continue to test. And then we'll say, quality is what matters. And folks ask, what is quality though? Well, really only your audience gets to determine that.
Yes.
In this case, we have an actual equation that you can run. Do the last 50 posts at least to get a reasonable sample size. Create a spreadsheet where you can see the send percentage for all of them, rank the top 10, look at them, repeat the best. Look at the top or the bottom 10, forget the rest. And then continue to test, because you never know what different format you're going to experiment with, and suddenly that send percentage has gone up.
And what you just said is so important, that our audience is the one that determines what the quality content is, because a lot of the folks who are listening to this show and folks who are responsible for the social ministry at their church are creatives by nature. And so for someone like that, someone like me, someone like you, we take a lot of pride in our creative output, in the work that we're creating and putting onto our social channels. And so for creatives, we often feel like the arbitrators of what is quality and what is not. And we get really proud, not in a negative way, but just like proud of the stuff that we create and put out there in the world. But it does take a lot of humility to sit back and do kind of a State of the Union like this and say like, okay, although I may be proud of a lot of these posts or a certain type of post, what is my audience saying is the type of content that resonates with them? And that's where, in doing this practice, taking 50 posts, looking at the insights and determining what is the content that our audience is responding to, that's where we have to kind of lay aside our own preference for creative expression and say, okay, these are, and maybe they'll line up, but more often than not, and I know this in my experience, I'm often surprised by the posts, because I always look at the insights of our post to do this a post at a time. I'm always surprised at the posts that folks are really sharing amongst each other, because they're very rarely the ones that I expect to go off. And so I just have to kind of set my creative ego aside in that circumstance and in a humble way, as a minister on social, create more of that type of content, because it's the audience that's saying, hey, this is the type of content that I really want to send to someone. It's really valuable, that is sparking conversations. So we have to pay attention to that and kind of set aside get another creative outlet to massage your creative ego, not the church social page.
And you might discover that the content that folks are really resonating with is like, oh, really? This?
Yeah.
It's always okay to explore the one for you, one for them approach. Sure. But what you can't do is completely neglect the preferences of your audience, because eventually you will just have no audience to reach. Because if you continually, indefinitely publish content that they've already kind of opted out of based on their attention, well, then you're just going to continually neglect them to the point where the feed is not distributing your content anymore. One for you, one for them is potentially a way that you can thread that needle. Ideally, you're just making content that, one, aligns with your church's mission and beliefs, but also is valuable to the audience. If I'm just spitballing here, imagining the type of content that would inspire sends in the church space, I can imagine strong theological takes in a sermon clip. So if you have a sermon clip and you're like, hey, this is what the Bible says about this, and it's very emphatic, I could imagine that compelling people to then share that with other people. I could imagine something that was really inspirational, or something that drives emotion in people. And we had a recent episode with Danielle Davis where she talked about this really amazing post where this small girl was getting baptized, and the post was just this like video of the girl sharing her testimony in the baptism tank before being baptized. I can imagine that would inspire a ton of sends, as it's like, oh man, this is awesome, like someone's testimony being shared. But it could also just be like an encouragement, like, oh, I'm going to send this to someone that's going through like a difficult time. I felt really encouraged by this. Perhaps they'll feel encouraged by this. Any others that kind of jump to your mind?
Yeah, that's the last one you hit there. Kind of like an encouraging word. That seems to be one that gets shared for us a lot. Like a quote post, a simple design, like a flat background with like big text. And that's on trend right now. Looking at your Instagram, at Brady Shear Instagram, like a lot of that, the carousel posts, not the reels, are just like flat background, big text. And so they're posts similar to that are either quotes from like authors or fathers or mothers of the faith, or quotes from something that has organically happened in our community, whether it's a sermon quote or something. Those seem to get sent a lot. And I think it's for that reason. It's like either you want to share this to your story to just like encourage the folks that follow you or like make a statement, or like you said, somebody is going through a hard time and they just like need an encouraging word. Somebody comes to your mind when you see that quote, you send it that way. And then the other one that gets sent more than any other post for us is the reels. I'll keep talking about that video about the bees, which there's another one coming. Actually, by now it will have already been posted. But it's stories about stuff that's going on in our community, and those are getting sent or shared a lot to the stories of folks in our community because they see themselves represented in those videos. It's like, oh yeah, this is my community, this is what's going on here. And they're excited to share that to their story, to share it in a way to their Instagram community for folks who don't belong to our church. Is like, oh yeah, this is part of my life. This is what I do on Sundays. You may not come to our church. You may not see this. So I'm excited to share this here so you can see.
And that is an element of sends that we haven't discussed yet. We've talked about sends as one-to-one. I send this post to Alex. But what you can also see is folks that are sharing your post to their public Instagram feed.
Yeah.
And that is a way to dramatically increase the reach. Messeri talked about this. He's like, if you go into your insights and you look at your post's metrics, and it will say accounts following that you reached and accounts not following that you reached, people interpret that as, oh, Instagram really decided to share my post with people that don't follow me. He says, perhaps. He's like, but one variable that is often overlooked are people that follow you, that shared the post to their story, which then amplified your post's reach to a ton of people that don't follow you. That wasn't initiated by us.
Yeah.
That was initiated by your followers.
That happened to me for the first time a couple weeks ago. I get like, on an average day, 1,000 people watch my story. On a good day, like 2,000 or 3,000 people watch my story. I had a story that I tagged a creator who has like 1 million followers on Instagram. She's in the coffee space, and she reposted it. And I was just looking through my stories, and it's like, 700 views, 1,200 views. And then that one popped up, and it had reached like 20,000 accounts. And that was the first time I was like, I made that connection. It's like, oh, right. This wasn't like explore reach or like discovery algorithm reach. This is just like she shared it to her story and she has a bigger audience than me, and it's showing me that in my insights. So that was the first time that I'd ever taken note of that. That just happened to me a couple weeks ago.
One of the things I'll do is when I publish a post, and this isn't exactly scientific, but on Instagram, I publish a post, and at the very top of your notifications, you'll have stories about you.
Yeah.
It's kind of newer. And when I see like blank stories mention you, the higher that number is after I publish a post is almost always correlated with the overall performance of the post.
Right.
So if that number is higher than normal, I'm like, this post is really taking off. Where back in the day, I would go like, how many likes does this post have?
Yes.
Now, and this is where Instagram's doing a good job, before I even see the likes of a post, because now I have to actually go to the post and refresh it to see its total number of likes, the first thing it's telling me is stories about you. And that metric is people that like your post so much, they feel compelled to share it to their story. Yeah. My whole community needs to hear about this. And the ones that do the best for me there are not the educational ones. They're always the emphatic opinion ones. They're like making a statement where I'm like, hey, you need to X about the Lord because of Y. And everyone's like, louder for the people in the back.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like, okay, like, they want to share that because they're like, I vehemently agree with this opinion and I want to share it with the world. And so that's insight from my audiences that may not be exactly true for yours, but human psychology is human psychology.
Totally.
And certainly there are things that we can learn there. Okay, let's talk about some of the other things that Maseri talked about on the show, unrelated to sends/shares. The first was this. In feed, and again, this is like, can we just call it the feed? He's like, no, in feed. I'm like, okay, it's a proper noun. I don't know. In feed, Instagram tries to heavily preference accounts that you follow and accounts where you have mutual follows. Example, if you and another person both follow each other, Instagram interprets that as meaning you're likely friends in real life and will more heavily weight that. So this is going to get really into the weeds here. And this may not be applicable for every church. But when I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, I have been making a terrible, terrible mistake on Instagram. Here's what I mean. My Instagram feed is my personal Instagram feed.
Right.
My Instagram profile, which is where the feed is located,
Yes.
is my professional Instagram. But my personal feed is not my professional Instagram.
Exactly.
My personal feed is food and fashion and fitness and very little church. In the past couple of years, highly influential figures in the Christian space have begun to follow me. And I'm always grateful. But I never follow back because I'm like, well, it's not that I don't care about their work. It's that my Instagram is for this specific thing.
Yes.
And I don't really need to see their content because I don't use Instagram for that.
Yep.
I use other things for that. Well, that was a big mistake.
I know, you and me both.
Because Instagram, Maseri said, he's like, if you follow someone and they follow you, you must be friends in real life. I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
So wait, if big name pastor follows me and I follow them back, you think that we're friends in real life? He's like, yes. And I was like, what might be the outcome of that? They're going to see a lot more stuff on your feed. I'm like, here's the thing. Selfishly, that's going to be beneficial for my account. And so what I did was I went back and I looked through some of in my verified section, there's now a section that says verified.
Yeah.
I went through all the verifieds and there was like, I was like, oh, Watoto Church, like, you know, the Watoto Church choir. They follow me. I was like, I should probably follow back. I was like, oh, Levi Lesko follow me. I should follow him back. You know, this pastor follow me. I should follow them back. And
You were already following JD from Hillsong.
follow him back. What? No, I wasn't until he DM'd me. I was like, oh, follow him back. And this has happened like a number of times, and I did follow JD back. So I was like, oh, I want to see, what is he up to? The reason is, if you go into your notifications as well, what happens in notifications? At the very top, it's like the verified notifications. And so what this means is I should also be liking these people's content because when I like it, it's going to show up as Brady Shearer liked their post at the very top of their notifications, which means they're more likely to see my content and reciprocate. And they're more likely to see my content because we both follow each other mutually. And guess what happens? They're more likely then to share my content. Like that was another good example. Scott Ligertwood on his stories. Hey, love Brady's work. And I was like, oh, should follow Scott. So I did. I'm picking it up. I'm starting to learn. And it's funny because years ago we did a podcast and we were like, hey, you know what you should do? Just go and like people's posts, you know, comment under people's posts. And that like no longer was a thing. And now it's a thing again.
Okay, so I've been making the same mistake on my personal profile for the same reasons. It's like on who I am on Instagram is not how I use Instagram, right? Like I'm a public figure of sorts. I'm a content creator, but my feed is like my friends and family, and I don't want it filled up with. And so I've been making the same mistake. But the question then is like for churches, because we actually hit on this just recently, maybe in a mailbag episode, someone was asking about like, who should my church follow or not follow? And I guess that's the question is like, okay, for Brady and Alex, that's one thing, but like, what about a church? What's best practice? Like who should church accounts be following to not leave some reach on the table here?
Two thoughts. Number one, this type of tactic is really going to be according to taste. And I like to categorize myself as the almost perfectly even balance of creative and like business mind. So the business mind is like analytical, and the creative mind is very abstract and, you know, woo. And sometimes they are at odds with each other. And the analytical mind is like, you know what you should do is you should follow back every verified person that follows you, because that would be the way to maximize effectiveness. And my creative mind is like, you know what? This used to be about the content. This used to be about writing. Remember when you were a writer? You have forsaken your once true identity and embraced something. You become the villain that you said you never would become.
Wow.
So for me, I don't follow back every verified account or every big account. Like, I'm like,
Right.
do I know you? Do I recognize you?
Do we have mutual interests maybe? Like,
Do I go to your account and I go, hey, wow, that's pretty cool. So I'm still not like optimizing to the nth degree. So to taste is something to consider here. We talked about effectiveness versus like mission. Like, do you do something just because it's effective if it feels like this isn't really true to me? That's your call. Here's where I think every church can embrace this type of technique. Back 7 years ago, when we would talk about this approach, we would say, if you are a church, don't follow random people. It's kind of strange.
Right.
If someone that you know attends your church follows you, feel free to follow them back. Don't preemptively follow someone from your church, even if you know them. Just don't do it. What you can do is preemptively follow other establishments in the community where you serve.
Yeah.
So imagine there's the Mexican place down the street, and everyone loves the Mexican place. You can follow them. And I would suggest that your church signs up for a verified account if you're willing to budget that in. And then I would suggest liking the posts from the establishments that you are proud to have in your city. So, hey, you know what? There's this real estate company, this real estate agent, and this business, and this dentist, and this lawyer, and this nonprofit. And we are so proud that they're part of this city and region that we serve in. So you already support them.
Yep.
Now you can actually support them on Instagram. And as a verified account, what's going to happen? Your content is going to show up at the top of their notifications. And they're going to become more aware of you. And eventually, that will translate to something happening in person,
Yeah.
their awareness of you, and it crosses over. We talk about crossover events. This crosses over to in person. And unfortunately, there's no way to pinpoint, it was exactly this that led to this. But what also might happen that would be clearly attributable to this is one day, maybe it's next summer after you've been doing this for about a year, you post your VBS. We have a free kids camp at our church this summer. And the Mexican place that has checked out your account because they're like, who's this church that keeps following us and liking us? They're pretty cool. We followed back. They saw your story
Yes.
and they're like, you know what? What a great value to the community. We're going to share this. And suddenly, through the compelling content that you created, through the existing ministry, this annual event that your church has always done, and the work that you did on social to support others is now being reciprocated to the point where that Mexican restaurant that, let's say, is way more well-known than your church is in the city, is broadcasting your church's ministry on its own goodwill that you've earned to people that don't yet follow your church.
Okay, so you mentioned it, so let's talk about it. We haven't talked about it in quite some time, Meta Verified. How much of a monthly investment are we talking about on average? And what other benefits do you see besides what we just talked about, which is you kind of guarantee yourself a top spot in the notification. So for a small church like mine, if I go and follow for Holy's, the local Mexican restaurant, that notification, they may not see it at all, but if they do, maybe it doesn't stand out because it doesn't have that blue badge. And so all of the benefits that you just kind of alluded to, these possible benefits that could happen, maybe get lost in the weeds there because I didn't have the visibility that a verified account might have. So besides that, what other advantages do you see to a church investing in a Meta Verified account, on that monthly basis?
In terms of cost, it's like $10 a month.
Okay.
Per platform. So I think if you want the verified badge on Instagram and Facebook, it might be 20, which is kind of annoying.
Yeah, double dipping. Nice, classic.
Facebook, the verified badge we pay for, but is not especially useful to us based on our audience. But the Instagram one is huge. There is also this intangible, unknown element of distribution. My Instagram content really started taking off once I got that verified badge.
Yeah.
Is that a coincidence? Or was that just because of my content changes? Because I also made a very clear change in content around that time. I don't know. Is it a little bit of column A plus column B? Guess we'll never know. I was speaking at a conference the other day. A woman comes up to me afterwards, and she runs the social for this denomination as a whole. And she said, in a very somber tone, our social accounts are getting bombarded with illicit material from bots and or bad actors that obviously know that we are a church and are doing everything that they can to bother us. And she was talking about what was happening, and they don't have an audience the size of mine, but I've never seen anything like this.
No.
And I was like, because there's not church in my name, but there is church in your name. And churches see this in the comments when they publish something. They're like, you know what is good? Hope. And people in the comments are like, you sickos. It's like, what can I say that won't upset you? And what Meta Verified gives you is a direct access to support. Surely we have seen this in Facebook groups or in threads before. It's like, does anyone have a contact at Meta?
Yeah.
Because I posted a puppy and my 15-year account got banned.
Yeah.
It's like, no, sorry. Like, that was an over-aggressive filter that got you, but there's no way of like getting contact with a real person that can fix it for you. Even if you could get contact with a real person with the context that we have at Meta, it's not like they can do anything. Meta's a giant company.
Yeah.
Verified gives you access. So what I told this person was, I was like, have you considered like different restrictions and different privacy sections? Like, we have them all. I was like, okay, get Meta Verified for just a month. Get a contact with a real person and see if that you can work it through. And hopefully that's one step in the right direction. If you have another church impersonating you, and by church, it's not an actual church. It's, again, a bad faith actor that's trying to disparage the global church's name, or maybe even your individual church. Same's happening for your pastor's account. They're looking for duplicate accounts. That was really useful for us. We haven't really seen that in the last year once we signed up for that. So there are a myriad of benefits. And then there's also the intangible of like, you think like our reach will go up a bunch? Maybe. Instagram says it won't, but final big item that I wrote down from this interview is Messeri saying that Instagram's focus is on creators and not publishers. And the distinction there was a creator is an individual and a publisher is an institution or an organization. And as soon as I heard that, ding, ding, ding in my head, okay, that has big ramifications for pastor accounts versus church accounts. And head of Instagram goes on to say, hey, we have seen a really big shift in the past decade or so from the power of institutions to communicate to the power of individuals to communicate. What social has done is it has made athletes more popular than the teams they play for.
Yeah.
It has made individual actors, that's probably a bad example because actors have always been famous. The athletes one is the one he used and probably the best one. Since when would a single player been more like followed than the team?
Yeah.
Sure, Michael Jordan, who transcended the sport, but like would LaMelo Ball, the first round draft pick of the Charlotte Hornets from like 4 years ago, have more following on Instagram by like a massive amount than the Charlotte Hornets, the basketball team? In the previous world, no, because LaMelo Ball couldn't directly interact with his audience in that way, but now he can. So this obviously just means, okay, I don't know how we figure this out missionally at our church, but if our pastor is active on social, or if our account efforts are put into a person, that is going to produce better fruit in our social ministry, likely, than a faceless brand account. We made the decision 5 years ago with Pro Church Tools. Brady Shearer was going to be the face of all of our accounts. We weren't going to use Pro Church Tools. We weren't going to use our logo. It was going to be Brady's name and Brady's face, because people connect with people. And what Messeri is emphasizing even more than that is that it's not just human psychology that's been around for 2,000 years. What we've seen in the past 10 years and the next 10, so this 20-year period that we're in right now, is the continued shift from power being with institutions, with Vice as an online publisher, or with BuzzFeed, or with Vox. It's shifting from that to individual creators, Mr. Beast, streamers. They have more power as folks than these once powerful institutions. And Instagram, they're actually like playing a complicit role in that, or they're even powering that. I don't really know where that line is. Are they just kind of riding the wave, or are they saying, hey, we see this wave, let's put a lot more emphasis and power behind it?
Yeah. We talked to Ron, who is formerly from Transformation Church, Mike Todd's church. And for a large church like that, he talked about their social strategy, and he said it was the social team at Transformation who's like, he said, Mike plays a big role in his social, but there's a big social team responsible for posting to the Transformation Church Instagram and also to Pastor Mike Todd's Instagram. So maybe speak to the mid-sized church who hears this and is compelled, okay, I hear that a personal account is going to perform better than an organizational account, but we don't have a team to generate content for our church account and our pastor's account, and our pastor wants to keep his account for his friends and family. He doesn't have the bandwidth to do ministry. He doesn't have the bandwidth to be a pastor on social. Like, what are the implications for small to mid-sized churches in light of learning that from Adam Mosseri?
Well, certainly if you have an older pastor, I just don't know if you can compel them to engage in social if they're not the ones that are driving that.
Yeah.
You know, we asked Carrie Newhoff about this when he was here in person, and I was like, you know, Carrie, no offense, you're an older person than me.
Right.
And I said, you've done a really good job of embracing digital. Yeah. Clearly you've prioritized that. So that's proof that, like, if someone cares, they can learn. Mm-hmm. You know, there's no point in time where a person, but much less a leader, should stop learning.
Sure.
So hopefully I'm still learning new skills at the age of 50 and 60. But pastors are often resistant to embracing social, and I understand why. In that case, I just don't know if you can game the system enough,
right,
unless you had their express permission to do it. And how you could do that, thread that needle, is, well, you probably have an archive of many, many, many sermons.
Sure.
So unlike an older leader in a different industry who wouldn't have that backlog of content, in the church you could repurpose that on social. And that might be a way of making it work.
Yeah.
What I think we're going to begin to see more of is pastors that grew up on social, like let's say we're in our getting close to mid-30s, early 30s, there, I know. You know? Let's imagine that we, you know, are pastoring. Let's say Alex wants to become a full-time pastor at a different church, which are two things that I could never see happen. One, okay. Leaving me, two, leaving his church.
Yeah.
But let's say, wow, he goes to pastor at a new church family. Well, he has an existing social media presence. And he's going to bring that, what he's built, to the next church as well. That's kind of an interesting new dynamic. In the previous era of ministry, before social, you would have pastors that pastor for a season in one context and then move to another season. And what do? They take their lessons with them. They take their experience with them. They are often preaching very similar sermons because, hey, this is my life experience and this is what I have to say and how I read the wisdom of Scripture and share it with others. And they were kind of bringing that with them as they went. Well, now there's going to be like a different element perhaps where they're like still bringing some of the audience with them digitally. It's like, oh, I'm serving in a different context. Oh yeah, who's that on your Instagram parishioner of a church? Oh, that was our previous pastor. He's at this new church, but I still like to follow him. I still like to follow her. Yep. She has really good. So that's kind of interesting. This might also be one of those things where you're like, I don't care if it's more effective.
Yes.
I don't like it.
Yeah.
And so we're not going to do it.
Yeah, you don't have to do everything.
And we talked about that. Maybe this is the style of Gene. You're like, look.
Yeah, I can't go that loose.
That's so relaxed. Yeah. I mean, like, how are they even fitting around your waist?
Yes,
like,
how do you connect them?
That's too relaxed. You know, there was a photo of Drake the other day on Instagram stories and it was like, no, too relaxed, Drake. You gone too far. Bring it back in. And so this might be where like, this doesn't really apply to me. But other folks, other churches might be like, yeah, like our pastor really cares about social. And so this is actually a trend that really works for us. And so we're going to lean into it. And that's how I like to do it. When trends come along that I know work well for me, I lean into them because not every trend is for me. I don't want to lean in equally to all trends because then I'll have like one thing that works and then the rest of it will look sloppy. Yeah. But if there's one specific trend that works for me, my type of content, people really like to share on Instagram. Interesting. That's probably going to work in my favor. I'm going to lean into that and double down on that to, if I can use this word, exploit that part of the platform as much as possible because it aligns with my mission, it aligns with who I am, and it aligns with best practices.
Yeah. And there's possibly for small to mid-sized churches, I think there's a hybrid approach that could end up bearing some more fruit than your accounts currently are without turning your pastor's personal account into like a pastoral persona account. Knowing that Instagram as a platform is focusing creators and not publishers, but also knowing that, like, aside from that, the type of content that resonates with audiences is like the personal content. And so what the hybrid approach that I'm thinking about would be to bring the type of content that you would imagine on a pastoral account, bring it onto your church's page. So like more lo-fi selfie style videos from your pastor or people in your community, because we know aside from how Instagram is going to prioritize the accounts, we know that folks resonate, our audience resonates with that content more than just a quote post or a text post. And so prioritizing content on your church's page, that is more personal in nature could be the hybrid approach that sees some more results without, kind of partitioning the two and investing a lot of resources in an area where maybe you don't have resources to invest.
Hybrid approach, love it. There are a lot of changes and trends on social that we want to talk about. And so in next week's episode, we're going to do our quarterly social media trends report.
Nice.
We're going to talk about trendy or timeless. We're going to look at the predictions that we made last quarter about social, see how right and or wrong that we were, make our predictions for this next cycle. This episode, we wanted to get to you right away because this Instagram knowledge was like, hey, this is brand new. Let's get it out as soon as we can. There's a lot more happening on social more broadly beyond just Instagram that we want to discuss. That's going to be on next week's episode. Make sure to check out Pro Church Tools Inc. On the Brady Shearer YouTube channel. Connect with me personally as a person. We're going to talk. We're going to show a lot more personal.
Yeah.
You want to see more Alex?
Maybe too much.
You want to see Alex and I beyond this show actually doing things?
Yeah. You want to see all of our legs?
Wow. Not just like, exactly. That is going to be on the main channel. Check out the debut yesterday. We're going to do 3 episodes in the first month, then take a week off, recalibrate. Okay. What went good? What went wrong?
Yeah.
How might we want to change? And stay tuned for next week's Summer 2024 Social Media Trends Report. Thanks as always for your time, attention, and trust. We'll talk to you next Wednesday. Can I call you Sister Sourdough?
Yep. You can.
No, we wouldn't be like, what do you mean you call him sister?
Yes.
I'm just trying to have some fun, man.
Yeah.